As a Muslim, have you ever felt out of place before, like an alien in some foreign land? How hard would you try to assimilate? Or would you not assimilate at all? Would you stick to your traditions and values? These are the questions that these Aussies faced in the middle of the 19th century when they came to Australia. But wait, they don't look white or European. So how are they Aussie? Well, they're actually Muslims, and they're pretty much essential to the development and growth of Australia. They're called Cameleers or camelmen. So who are these camelmen and how did they get here? And where are they today? Well, let's find out. In order to talk about camelmen in Australia, we need to talk about Australia first and how it came to be. In the 19th century, the British Empire had added the enormous island of Australia to its collection of colonies. The British Empire wanted it to be a penal colony where they would send all their convicts to serve their sentence on the harsh frontier territory. However, unlike the indigenous inhabitants of Australia, the new European arrivals would find out just how harsh and unforgiving the land would be. In an attempt to establish an economy in balance with a range of physical environments, the Europeans needed as many labourers as they could get their hands on. And considering Australia was far away from Europe, they couldn't hire much white labour. But Australia was close to Asia and part of the Pacific, so they introduced cheap labour from Asia. By the 19th century, the British had soaked up much of India and Afghanistan into its vast colonial empire. So the early settlers thought that it would be a great idea to bring Afghans and their camels over to Australia, especially because horses had proven unsuccessful. One thing to know about the Afghans that came to Australia is that they weren't really all Afghans. You see, the camels were purchased from British-ruled India, and the camelmen were mostly Afghani nomads, herders, livestock breeders, and traders who had migrated to India. So some camelmen were Indian, but nonetheless, white settlers labelled camelmen as Afghans. The first Muslim Cameleer arrived on the 9th of June 1860 at Port Melbourne to participate in the Burke and Wills exploration expedition. They brought them over because according to the Victorian Expedition Committee, the camels would be comparatively useless unless accompanied by their native drivers. This was Australia's first major inland expedition using camels, and it was a total disaster. Many lives were lost and nearly all the animals they brought along were dead, all except the camels. Only the camels were able to survive the harsh conditions of arid Australia and provide critical supplies to the outback settlements. Following this expedition, by the late 1860s and 1870s, small groups of cameleers were shipped in and out of Australia. They would cart wool and other goods all across the outback. As they gained experience and learned how the new country's economy worked and what European society needs are, they also saw new business opportunities. The Muslim Cameleers began to forge their own lives in Australia. They began to import their own camels and run their own camel strings. By the 1890s, the camel business in Australia was dominated by Muslim merchants and brokers. Muslim settlements developed all around inland railheads, and the next thing you know, mosques were being built in remote places, as well as in the hearts of Australian cities. The African Cameleers were devout Muslims, which is why they immediately built these rough outback shelters as the first mosques of Australia. They were called bush mosques, and they were popping up everywhere along these Cameleer tracks. Islam served as a moral and a legal code for the African Cameleers, and the adherence to their faith greatly alienated them from predominantly European Christian communities. The Europeans on the expedition saw more reasons to view these camelmen as very different from themselves when they observed their religious customs. The Muslims held prayers 5 times a day, causing what seemed to be an unnecessary delay for the whole expedition. They would also only eat meat from halal slaughtered animals, which posed enormous practical problems. In one journal from Ernest Giles, a white explorer, it mentioned that a cameleer by the name of Muhammad Saleh would run up to the emus that they had shot for food and recite the Quran on them before slaughtering them. He also added that Saleh was mocked for his adherence to his religion by other white colonists. However, despite their constant ridicule and religious intolerance, the Cameleers clung onto their daily prayers, their fasts and prohibitions. So if the Cameleers had established themselves pretty much all across Australia, then where did they all go? Well, in 1901, the Immigration Restriction Act, along with the White Australian policy, made it increasingly difficult for the Cameleers to enter Australia. And by the late 1920s, motor transport had penetrated the bush and overtook the need for cameleers. In successfully laying the foundations of the outback transport and communication network, the cameleers ironically worked towards their own demise. By this time, however, the cameleers had become wealthy old men and went on to return back to their own countries as retirees. Some turned to other trades, while others retreated to the charities of the mosques they helped to build. Their camels were let loose into the Australian outback, free to roam the lands. Many of their later descendants have since largely forgotten their traditions and Afghan origins and have fused into the Australian social fabric. The Muslim Cameleers that came to Australia, that came to this land looking for work and opportunity. In the process, they laid their foundations for the future Muslim and non-Muslim generations to come to this land and forge new lives. To many during their time, they were seen as weird alien-looking foreigners, but today, they are rightfully recognized as pioneers. May Allah reward them for their hard work and adherence to their faith, despite the challenges. Ameen.
If you enjoyed this video and other content that OnePath Network produces, please head over to the link below and find out how you can support us. Jazakumullahu khairan.